welcome to the CUAHSI Cyberseminar conference call. My name is Nika, and I'll be your coordinator for today. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. We will be facilitating a question-and-answer session towards the end of today's conference. If you wish to ask a question, please key star followed by 1 on your touch-tone telephone. If at any time during the call you require assistance, please press star 0, and a coordinator will be happy to assist you. I would now like to turn the presentation over to your host for today's call, Mr. John Duncan, Project Manager. Please proceed, sir.
Thanks, Nika, and welcome everyone to today's Cyber Seminar. It's the last of 4 in what has turned out to be a star-studded October for this Cyber Seminar series, so I appreciate all of you making it today. Just quickly, for those who are new to this, this is the 5th semester that we've been doing this. We're always anxious to get feedback. Throughout the talk, if you're having any technical difficulties with phone or web, if possible, you can send me a chat in the chat box, which is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And in the Send To drop-down menu, you can send that to me, the host, the CUAHSI account, or to everyone if it's for general things. Afterwards, if you can send me an email to commanager@cuahsi.org if you have a good experience or bad, we're always curious to hear. And this presentation has been uploaded to the CUAHSI website. You can follow it by getting to the Cyber Seminar current link and finding it from there. So as I mentioned, this is our last one for this fall, but there are other CUAHSI activities going on. The next one of interest to the CUAHSI member representatives is the annual meeting. This is taking place December 1st at 3 p.m. Eastern. That's a Thursday. And just plead with you all to please show up. We need quorum to transact business, and that's getting to be harder and harder as we get more and more university members, which is a good thing. Also, for all of you, we're having another reception at the Fall AGU meeting in San Francisco. This one is going to be at Tuesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific time at the Argent Hotel. As details become available, they'll be put on the CUAHSI website. But free drink, free appetizers for you, your grad students, and whoever else is interested. So it should be a good chance for us to get together and learn about HIS, what's going on, and what David and his team have been able to do since today, as well as hear from the Hydrologic Measurement Facility team and some other things. Also, there's a pub workshop, the Prediction and Ungauged Basins Initiative. That's going to be held in Berkeley, California in the 2nd week of January of next year. Details are still, they're coming together. There is a website linked off of the CUAHSI website, and we hope to have registration details up in the next day or 2. So I urge you all to go to the CUAHSI website for more info on any of this. I'd now like to Maidment, who is the Engineering Foundation Professor of Engineering and the Director of the Center for Research in Water Resources at UT Austin, where he's been on the faculty since 1981. David received his bachelor's degree in Ag Engineering with first-class honors from the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, New Zealand, and both his master's and PhD degrees in Civil Engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. David, as I'm sure you all know, has co-authored and edited several books, some of which are undoubtedly on your shelves: Applied Hydrology, Handbook of Hydrology, and Hydrologic Modeling Support with GIS. David's won numerous awards, including Esri's Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to the application of GIS and water resources. I would like to send a personal thanks to David for his tireless activities, as you'll hear here. They've done an amazing thing. This entire team has just worked tirelessly for the last 18 months or so since they actually got funding, and many hours before it was actually officially awarded. So David, thanks for being here with us today, and I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Ben John. I appreciate very much your help, and Rick Hooper's also in our work. I want to acknowledge the fact that there are many collaborators in our research: Ilya Soslavsky, Reza Wahaj, and Chaitan Baru from the San Diego Supercomputer Center, Praveen Kumar from the University of Illinois, Mike Piazecki from Drexel, Rick Hooper and John Duncan I just mentioned, Dave Tarberton and Jeff Horsburgh from Utah State University, Venkat Lakshmi from South Carolina, and Chumyao Zhang from Alabama, Julian from Berkeley, Yao Liang from Virginia Tech, Ken Rechow from Duke, Upmanu Lal from Columbia, Leroy Posh from Colorado State, Dennis Lettenmeyer, who's the chairman of our Oversight Committee, Barbara Minska, who's helping us from the cleaner side, and NCSA, and lots of grad students and postdocs have helped with this, Jill Strasburg here in Texas, and Ben Riddell at Illinois, and Luis Bermudez and Bora Baran and Drexel, and a number of others I know. So I want to thank everyone for all their assistance. We couldn't have done anything without the big team effort that John referred to. You've seen this diagram, CUAHSI Hydrologic Information Systems, many times before, and our part of this is to try to understand the relationship between hydrologic information systems and hydrologic observatories. The CUAHSI Hydrologic Information System component was one of the original in the HydroView vision that CUAHSI put forward. And so we've been working on the project that John referred to for 1 year and a half already. And before that, we had a CUAHSI Hydrologic Information System Committee that was in existence for 2 years before that. So we've really been working on this for about 3 years and a half, 1 year and a half on this project. The Hydrologic Information System at NSF is considered part of something called Environmental Cyber Infrastructure. And that is itself part of an NSF Cyber Infrastructure program. There's recently been organized an Office of Cyber Infrastructure under the NSF Office of the Director, which has a budget of $500 million. And for the environment, there are several pilot projects. There's CUAHSI that our Hydrologic Information System project is concerned with. There's CLEANER for environmental engineering. There's Orion for ocean sciences, and NEON for ecological observatories. So we are, in one sense, supporting CUAHSI in our work for the observatories and other aspects, and in another sense, we're part of something larger at NSF, which is this cyber infrastructure. Our CUAHSI Hydrologic Information System team is distributed across the country. The red dots here are the original co-PIs on the proposal that we made to NSF. I serve as the principal investigator here at the University of Texas. Paveen Kumar is the co-PI at the University of Illinois, and he's doing advanced data analysis that I'll refer to later. Michael Piasecki is our co-PI at Drexel University, and he's dealing with metadata. Rick Hooper is the co-PI at the CUAHSI Program Office in Washington. And the big red dot there is the San Diego Supercomputer Center, which is our technology partner. We decided that we couldn't, as a domain community, try to develop cyber infrastructure and information systems by ourselves. And so we engaged the San Diego Supercomputer Center there. Chaitan Baru is the principal investigator. Ilya Soslavsky is the scientist with whom I have most contact, and Reza Wahad is our really hard-working programmer who the night before last told me he'd been awake for 32 hours. That is a measure of how hard they're working to try to help us do our duty. There is available a status report on our work. This is at the website that is given here, and this summarizes, as much as we're able, the knowledge that we have accumulated up to this point. It's about 200 pages long. It has 11 chapters. There's many authors involved, and we've tried to summarize the insights that we've gained so that you can learn about them and benefit from them as much as possible. If you would like to provide feedback, you're very welcome. Please just send comments directly to me at the email address that's given in the slide here. Our HIS goals are to develop a hydrologic data access system, that is to say better access to a large volume of high-quality hydrologic data. We want to support observatories by synthesizing hydrologic data for a region or a digital watershed. Advancement of hydrologic science by using data modeling and advanced analysis, and hydrologic education, better data in the classroom and basin-focused teaching. So let me move on now to the first of these goals, the hydrologic data access system. As part of our work, we have conducted a pretty extensive assessment of user needs for a hydrologic information system. And this graph comes out of the latest part of that summary. This user assessment was done, led by David Tarverton and Christine Bandaradoga at Utah State University. And one of the questions that we asked in the survey was, which of the 4 goals is most important to you? And we see here that the data access goal is the one favored by 36% of our respondents, and the science and observatory support The next level is sport, about 24%, and education comes last, which is a little bit sad for those of us who are involved in education, but I'm sure that we'll be able to do that effectively eventually. So focusing now on our first goal, and you can read much more about our user assessment in Chapter 4 of the status report. There's lots of interesting information there about what tools people want to use in operating systems and so on. We have developed something which we are calling the Hydrologic Data Access System. And the intent of developing this system is to provide a common data window on data from federal data sources like the USGS and EPA, National Climate Data Center, NASA, National Weather Service, and also to be able to add into that common data window observatory data that are collected at the CUAHSI Hydrologic observatories. And so the analogy here is sort of like with Travelocity. So instead of having the Travelocity, you just go to Travelocity, you don't worry about the Hilton website or the American Airlines website, and through Travelocity you get information from Hilton and American Airlines. Well, the same with this common data window. We want to have one place where you can go, and that itself is going out to all these other sources to get information. Our prime example at this point is work that we're doing with the USGS to provide access to the National Water Information System. So the National Water Information System has its own website, which is given in this slide, and using that website you can manually query and graph and download data. There's data there for about 1.4 million locations in the US for real-time data, site information, surface water, groundwater, and water quality. What we're attempting to do with CUAHSI Web Services is to provide automated query and download capabilities, and the mantra of this is to get the web pages out of the way, which seems almost contradictory, but as we go along here, I think you'll see what the logic is of this. So in our, which is running on the website that is shown here, http://sdsc.edu/HDAS, this is a production server that's maintained by the San Diego Supercomputer Center. What you can do is zoom in on the map of the US, which is shown in the top left corner. You can select a site out of the National Water Information System sites. As shown in the center, this happens to be the Neuse River near Clayton, North Carolina, which is the station with the longest flow records in the Upper Neuse Basin. And you can get information on what kind of records are there, discharge, water quality, peak flow, whether there's any water, groundwater, and so on. Once you've got site information, you can also take that information and select a period of data, as it's shown on the right-hand side at the top of this display, and you can create a time series chart to view the data for a particular period and to view the data tabularly, as you see on the right-hand side here. There's also a button at the bottom where you can download data, so you can download into Excel or kind of the CSV. Separated values. Okay, there we are. I forgot what CSV was for a minute. And so the idea is that you can view data here and you can download data. The idea that lies behind all of this is a concept called web services, which is a new development in computer science, and it's a very important thing that is going to have a profound impact on what we do in the hydrologic information system. So what you see on the left-hand side is the data portal, which contains the hydrologic data access system that I mentioned. The hydrologic data access system in its operation is accessing a web services library. And this is a library of functions that do elementary things. I'll show you some details about that in a moment. Now, your applications can also access this same library. So you can access the same library of services from Excel, ArcGIS, from MATLAB. You can also do this from Fortran, C++, Visual Basic. You can access them from a hydrologic model. And it does not matter what operating system that you're working with. You can be in Windows, Unix, Linux, Mac. And so the reason that none of that matters is that these web services operate with something called the Simple Open Access Protocol, which is a protocol developed by the World Wide Web Consortium that allows computers to talk to one another directly. So the web services library contains code elements that are actually resident on a computer in San Diego, but when you're accessing them from your computer, pushing them through the portal, and it is as if the code is on your own computer. And so the SOAP protocol means that essentially computers can function as an integrated network, somewhat like what we do with email, where we have lots of machines that we interact with, and there are different locations in the country. In this instance, what happens is the machines are actually interacting with respect to the programming capabilities that they have. And with web services, we can actually build these automated data access systems for NWIS and other data sources that I've described. So here is the web services library that we have created so far for NWIS. Again, this library is accessible on the production server at San Diego. And so you can see there are functions like get values, get water quality values, get site info, get discharge info, get stations with water quality parameters, make KML file for Neuse, this is so you can work with Google Earth, get water quality parameter units, get water quality level, get groundwater level values. And each of these is a function that you can invoke to get particular kinds of information about sites, about parameters measured at sites, or about data that are measured at those locations. So the idea is that you've got these little code elements and they sit in a library. That library is accessed from the portal to make the displays that I demonstrated, but you can access these services yourself, and this means that the entire National Water Information System can be as if it's a local disk on your own computer. In other words, you can program as if you had the entire national archive of NWIS data available to you directly across the whole country. And you can just call for stations and they will automatically appear as part of your analysis. An application which has utilized these capabilities has been developed by Jeff Horsburgh at Utah State University called the Utah State Time Series Analyst. This is an application that Jeff had developed previously before our CUAHSI project got going, and what he did was he reprogrammed it so that his application would run off of CUAHSI web services. So before he was doing that, he had designed his own database and downloaded data into it, and his application graphs data, and it makes box and whisker charts and time series plots and frequency histograms and things of that nature, as you can see here. It also calculates summary statistics. And before the web services were available, he just had his own little local database of an area up in Utah. Once he programmed it so it operated off of our CUAHSI web services, it could operate anywhere in the country. And we are now making this application available through our web portal so that it can be accessed by users anywhere in the country. So you can use Jeff's work from any place in the country, and you can use it to access sites located anywhere in the country. And this is a huge increase in the benefit that's associated with his application. We're hoping this will be part of a hydrologic information toolkit, and others would be able to develop similar tools that we can add to this toolkit. So, as I've indicated, we're doing this CUAHSI Web Data Services for the National Water Information System, for NCDC, for EPA STORET, for the National Water Quality Archive, for AmeriFlux, for long-term ecological research, for NCAR, probably later for NASA, for National Weather Service, NextRat, and so on. And we can ingest data into applications like Excel, ArcGIS, MATLAB, Access, SAS, Fortran, C++, and Visual Basic, which our surveys have shown to be the most highly rated applications that hydrologists want to use. One, beyond NWIS, one system that we're working on is the capacity to ingest data from AmeriFlux. AmeriFlux is a agglomeration of data that's operated by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. It's actually a NASA DAC, but the individual flux towers that are in AmeriFlux are actually run by academic investigators at different parts in the country. And from the AmeriFlux site, we can ingest data about vertical fluxes of water, heat, carbon dioxide, net radiation, and things like that. If we want to build a new web service, which is what we're doing in this case, what we need is a map of the points at which the towers are located, and we need to build a web services library which will automatically extract from the AmeriFlux site the observation data that are stored in those towers. We've got some services running for that, although they're not yet on the production server at SDSC. And this is an example of going into Excel from the Duke Pine Forest Ameriflux site. So on the left-hand side of your screen, the parameters here, this is the Ameriflux site at Duke Pine. It's reading the H, which is sensible heat flux. It's doing so from 7/3 to 7/10/2003, which is 1 week of data. The values that are shown here are 30-minute interval values. This is sensible heat flux and watts per square meter. And you can see them plotted on the left-hand side here as we would normally do in Excel. And on the right-hand side is an XML add-in, which is interpreting the XML output from the web service and ingesting it automatically into Excel. Now, this result is being shown here for Excel, but it could just as easily be in any other application as well. So in addition to the portal, we also have the idea that web services can ingest data directly into applications, and this can be data from, in this case, Ameriflux or Analyst, or as our services expand, there'll be other data sources available there also. Now, we couldn't do any of this without metadata, and metadata is a very complex subject, and we've got an expert in our team, Michael Piasecki at Drexel University, and he's got a group working with him there to help us understand this. So we have metadata about different data sources that produce information like NCDC, NWIS, National Center for Environmental Prediction, Weather Service, National Geographic Data Center. There could also be metadata that deal with individual water quality samples, like from CUAHSI observatories. There can be data from sensor arrays, such as many observatory networks are building. There's arrays of water quality or water level or other kinds of hydrologic sensors. And there can also be metadata that describe individual models, like MMS or HSPF or air quality models. So metadata is a very complex subject, and there's a chapter in our status report which provides details of how we're handling that. Michael Piasecki could give an entire seminar on metadata, and I apologize that I've only got one slide here, Michael, but hopefully I've often said that Michael is the key product of our project in this regard, because he's really an expert in this area, and he's built up a very nice team at Drexel to help us with this subject. We've also been very fortunate in being able to collaborate with the CLENA program. And so we've developed with Barbara Minska and the National Center for Supercomputer Applications something called the CLENA CUAHSI Cyber Collaboratory. And the website is given here for the Cyber Collaboratory. The intent is to make this a common data portal which would be able to have web applications resident at many locations viewed through a common window. It provides user support and feedback for it. The intent eventually is to support collaborative research using shared tools and dialogue with a group of scientists who are all working together in the collaboratory. And hopefully we're going to have CLENA CUAHSI joint projects where we can display the results in the collaboratory. So I want to thank Barbara and NCSA for hosting this service for us. This service is still under development, so it's going to be evolving over the next days and the weeks. But this is our primary means of showing how we're working together between CUAHSI and CLENA in the cyber infrastructure. One of the things that we're most keen on also in CUAHSI is to be able to work with and to support hydrologic observatories. The key thing that we're doing with observatories is to synthesize hydrologic data for a region in the form of a digital watershed, and the key part of that is to be able to look at observations data. So the general idea of the support for observatories is that we want to develop a digital watershed so that hydrologists can integrate observed and model data from various sources into a single description of the environment. This means the physical environment with which hydrology takes place, and also the water conditions of the fluxes, the water levels, the concentrations, the flows, and so on that are occurring at different points in the environment. Now, the digital watershed, as we presently conceive it, is defined as follows. It's a synthesis of hydrologic observation data, geospatial data, remote sensing data, and weather and climate data into a connected database for a hydrologic region. The Formats that we're going to need to do to integrate to solve this include relational database representation for hydrologic, about that in a moment, GIS data to deal with geospatial things like soils and land cover and stuff like that, NetCDF for weather and climate data. NetCDF is a data format which is supported by our sister institution, Unidata, which deals with atmospheric science delivery to the meteorology community, and EOS HDF, which is the standard NASA format for dispersion of remote sensing data. HDF stands for Hierarchical Data Format. It was a format developed at the National Center for Supercomputer Applications, and EOS stands for Earth Observing System. And so what we need to do to build a digital watershed is to be able to bring all these data together and fuse them into a single representation that combines all these different aspects of water and the water environment. The hydrologic observations database is something that we're going to store in a relation database like Access or PostgreSQL or SQL Server, and it takes stream flow, groundwater levels, soil moisture data, flux tower data, water quality, precipitation, and climate data. In other words, observation data made at points, or it could be a repository for summary data from sensor networks that generally put out much more information than we want to store permanently. And there's also access to these data through web interfaces. In order to provide a structure for the hydrologic observations data, I developed a simple design that you can see here, which just consists of three tables, one called a monitoring point table, which describes the locations where things are measured, one called a time series table that contains the time series of things that are measured there, and one called a TS type table, which describes the kinds of time series that are measured at those locations. And the two relationships that are shown there are just forms of connection in a relation database that just says the hydro ID of a monitoring point is the feature ID of a time series, and the TS type ID of a time series is connected to its descriptive character. David Taberton conducted a review through CUAHSI of this draft version. He got 22 responses, and then he and Jeff Horsburgh at Utah State have redesigned this observations data model into a much more comprehensive format, which is shown in this slide. So there's many considerations that went into the way that they expanded this. And in Chapter 6 of our status report, you can read more clearly what's all the reasoning that went into this. What we're hoping is that you will want to use the observations data model to store your observations, and that by doing that we can test adequacy of this observations model design and amend it further if we need to be able to provide a good repository for point observation data that many investigators will collect as part of their work. The digital watershed prototype that we have been working on is for the Neuse Basin in North Carolina. This is 4 8-digit hydrologic unit code watersheds, which are the gray shaded areas in this map, and the green areas are 2-digit USGS water resources regions. Obviously, the Neuse Basin was our prototype area for the development of the observatory for CUAHSI, and we took it over, and we've been using that as our prototype for the development of digital watersheds also. In Chapter 8 in the status report, there's quite a lot more detail about how we developed the digital watershed for the Neuse Basin. There's 3 components of this. The first of these is Neuse atmospheric water, and there's a component for surface water and a component for subsurface water. So Neuse atmospheric water contains data for daily precipitation data from NCDC gauges. There's NEXRAD daily rainfall rasters. There's land surface atmospheric fluxes from the North American Regional Reanalysis of Climate. This is the North American Regional Reanalysis of Climate is a reconstruction of the climate of the country since 1972 in 3-hour time sets. It's just an amazing data set. The format that you see here is of an ArcGIS geodatabase, and so the things that you're looking at are this is a geodatabase. The methodology is called a feature data set, which establishes the spatial coordinates of a data set. This raster series is a set of rasters which describe rainfall or climate information over time. And then there's a time series and TS type tables here, which describe the time series that I referred to from the observations model. So we have vector GIS data, which is points, lines, areas, and volumes here. We have raster GIS data, which is land cover, terrain, rainfall, and so on here. And then we've got tables, which are shown here. So we're using this as our repository and integrating mechanism for these different data types. Neuse surface water contains stream flow, water quality, and hydrologic observation data. There's actually a real-time data collection system in Neuse, and we have repositories of that information. And it also has the normal GIS data, river networks, water bodies, watersheds, monitoring points, and so on, land cover, soils. And this is also where we're storing the products of remote sensing. On MODIS, because it seemed like MODIS was the remote sensing data source that is most used in the hydrology community, Praveen Kumar has been instrumental in developing special tools for the processing of remote sensing data and incorporating it into the digital watershed. And Venkat Lakshmi has been developing data cutouts for different areas. In this case, he's done this for the Neuse Basin. And this is described in Chapter 7 of our status report. So Venkat's work is described there. I should have put that on the slide. So in this case, the surface remote sensing stuff is being stored in Neuse surface water. For the groundwater, this is a section through the Neuse Basin out to the coast, and you can see on the left-hand side, the red line shows the cross-section location, and then the cross-sections are shown here for the hydrogeologic units. There are 10 aquifers in the coastal plain of North Carolina, and they're separated by aquitards. One of them that we've looked at is the Beaufort aquifer that's indicated here. And we have built a geodatabase representation also for the groundwater system. It consists of several components. The component at the top is a three-dimensional representation of the bore lines or boreholes based on information that comes from the North Carolina Division of Water Resources. So what we're doing here is we are taking data from the North Carolina Division of Water Resources website in tabular form. We're first establishing the map locations where the wells are in geographic space and XY space. These are stratigraphic wells and also wells for monitoring water information. Then we're building three-dimensional objects, and we've developed a toolbox for doing that so that each hydrogeologic unit that's penetrated as a borehole goes down is colored, as you see here. And from that, we can build a three-dimensional representation of the subsurface units. The display shown at the bottom is a GeoVolume, you'll hear more about this in a moment, of the hydrogeologic units in this aquifer system, or at least 3 of them, that's been developed by the U.S. Geological Survey using GMS. So one of the ways of representing the subsurface environment is with arbitrarily shaped three-dimensional volumes, and in this case we got those directly from the USGS for their interpretation on our own. This is the data model that we're building here is in collaboration with GEON, which is the geoinformatics project that NSF has in cyber infrastructure. I mentioned a GeoVolume, and this is an innovation that we are bringing out for 3D representation of the surface and subsurface. So the idea is that we take an area of the land surface and put a boundary around it, then we extrude that boundary down to a certain elevation under the surface and say this is the domain of interest, and we want to be able to describe that as precisely as possible. In the picture on the right-hand side here, we're showing a ModFlow model. This is actually of the Savannah Riverside in South Carolina, where you can see the brown, the green, and the purple are the physical locations of 3 layers of a ModFlow model of that particular site. So here we're building a geographic representation of the cells in a simulation model. The image at the bottom shows a GeoVolume of the layered soil texture for the Neuse Basin that comes from STATSCO. So the different colors here represent the different texture types that are in the layers of Statco, and the vertical layers here represent the extruded depth underneath the surface of those soils. This is vertically exaggerated, of course, because the Statco data only go down to about 5 feet, and this looks like the soil's about a mile deep. But you can see the idea. So the idea here is that we want to work on as precise a description as possible of the surface and subsurface environment, including all the porous media that are there. The third goal is the advancement of hydraulic science through data modeling and advanced analysis. And I'm going to talk a little bit for a moment about hydrologic science. I'm going to make an assertion here, which is that it is as important to represent hydrologic environments precisely with data as it is to represent hydrologic processes with equations. And I realize that might be a little bit of an innovative thought for some of you. I've been struggling actually trying to figure out how to assess all of our informatics stuff and bring it into a scientific context, and I prepared a paper for our Science Planning Committee on this subject. So I'm suggesting that there is what I'm calling here hydrologic process science. That is to say, science dealing with equations, with simulation models, with predictions, with the functioning of hydrologic processes. And there's hydrologic information science, which deals with the digital watershed, with data models, with integration of hydrologic data with data from neighboring disciplines. In other words, with a very, very careful structuring of data. And the intent is that hydrologic information science should support hydrologic process science. And that might include the embedding within a digital watershed of predictive models so that we can look at what their consequences would be in the landscape. But we're not trying to get too much into prediction with the HDAS effort. We're trying to build the data side of it, and that's what we're... Now, as part of this hydrologic information science, we've defined something called a hydrovolume, which is analogous here to a geovolume. So if we take a watershed and extrude it vertically into the atmosphere and the subsurface, then we can say a hydrovolume is a volume in space through which water, energy, and mass flow are stored internally and transformed. So what we're really doing here is extending to hydrology the concept of a control volume in fluid mechanics, except that we're doing it in geographic coordinates in real geographic space and not simply in an arbitrary way. And we can say we have a hydrovolume for the whole Neuse Basin, as you see here. We may also have a hydrovolume for a particular portion of the basin. So what you see here are locations of USGS gauges, not all of them in the basin actually, only about 20 of them. Each of these gauges cuts off the area above it from the area below, and it's measuring the flow at the watershed here, number 1, and the watershed here, number 2. And so we can build hydrovolumes that describe the water balances that are taking place within each of these watersheds or catchments. And the solid materials at the bottom are the geovolume, the portion of the hydrovolume that contains solid earth materials. So the notion is a hydrovolume could be a whole basin, it could be a watershed. A hydrovolume could also be a stream channel hydrovolume, as you see here. So this is a three-dimensional representation of a portion of a tributary of the Neuse River that was developed by something called the River Channel Morphology Model, developed by Venkatesh Mirwada here in CRWO. So we're taking blue line representation of the stream system in 2 dimensions and using mathematical models and hydraulic geometry building a 3-dimensional representation of the river channel analytically using hydraulic geometry. And each of these elements in this channel might itself be a hydrovolume. And so there could be exchange of fluxes across the surfaces and across the ends and so on. So any subset of any subdivision of hydrovolume is itself a hydrovolume. Why do we want to do that? Well, we want to be able to do fluxes and flows. We want to do water, mass, and energy balances in watersheds. So we have this rather nice artist rendition, which you've seen pictures like this a lot. But the question is, we can all draw pictures like this, but how can we really pull off doing fluxes where the atmospheric fluxes are going vertical and they're in one set of units, and the flows coming through the landscape are horizontal and they're in some other set of units, and there's subsurface flow, which is in a three-dimensional solid environment, and this is in a fluid mechanics atmospheric environment, and we've got a surface environment. This is a very, very complex thing to be able to link together atmospheric, surface, and subsurface water. So what we've built as a prototype within our HIS project is a flux coupler for the Neuse Basin, and it's in Chapter 9 of the status report. And the notion is that we can look at flux, whether it's water, mass, or energy, or any kind of mass actually, and just look at it as fluxes and flows. In this case, we've got evaporation and precipitation vertically, and stream flow horizontally, and groundwater recharge vertically. And everything is built so that it all comes together in a very clean way that includes a controlled vocabulary for units, so that you can get unit dimensions. You have all kinds of mixtures of units going in, and the right things happen internally so that the fluxes are calculated appropriately. This is a slide which, again, is a representation of a much larger body of work developed by Praveen Kumar at the University of Illinois. The National Center for Supercomputing has some tools called D2K, Data to Knowledge, and I2K, ImageTap. Praveen has just made an announcement that the UIUC software for data mining with Modus will be available next week from the website that he gives here. So Praveen has developed a processing system for Modus that uses D2K and I2K to automatically ingest and process Modus images, and to be able to filter out data which the cells aren't very good quality and get just the best quality data. That's the image to knowledge. I2K thing does that. And then he converts that into a table of information that shows, for example, the enhanced vegetation index as a function of time. And then he does studies of that as it exists over watersheds. So the three-dimensional box that you see here is intended to show that you can have altitude, you can have X and Y, so that you can deal not simply with remote sensing, but also with atmospheric water fluxes over a watershed. There can be a box for January, there can be a box for February. This is a four-dimensional data model where space is represented by 3 dimensions and time by 1 dimension, and then we're measuring all kinds of variables on that particular grid. So we call this the data cube, and this is the core of our hydrology data model. We say that we represent a data value as a function of where it is in time, space, and what variable it describes. This actually is a recipe for an n-dimensional array structure also that like that CDF uses. Now, if you think about the dimensions of space, time, and variables, in space we have statistical methods that deal with geostatistics. In time we have time series analysis, and then we have several variables, we have multivariate analysis. But when you take space, time, and multivariables all together, that's a very complex thing where our techniques are still emerging. And so Praveen's work is focused on data mining to try to understand how we can tease out relationships that are for many variables which are varying in space and time. So we're trying through Praveen's work and his collaborators at Illinois to be able to develop new analysis and interpretation techniques for data in this domain. And finally, let me just briefly mention hydrologic education. I'm suggesting that we can reorient the way that we teach hydrology to focus on a particular basin and the interpretation of that basin rather than teaching a physics-based course. I've taught hydrology for 25 years and written books in the field, as John mentioned, and I've always done it in the physics-based way: precipitation, evaporation, runoff, infiltration, modeling, blah. This past semester, with the website that you see at the bottom, I tried to teach a course which was focused on the interpretation of a particular basin. And I got people, geomorphologists, geologists, do that, and their help was very instrumental because I don't know a lot about this basin that they know. I constructed water balances for each phase of the hydraulic cycle for the atmosphere, surface water, soil, and subsurface water to sort of integrate the exercise together, and used Unidata's integrated data viewer to access weather and climate information. In this case, this is a map of surface evaporation over North America from the North American Regional Reanalysis of Climate. I found this to be a very interesting and helpful new way of teaching hydrology, and I'm sure that as our HIS matures, we can do better in this regard. So where are we going from here? NSF Earth Sciences Division has been pleased with the output of our current quasi-HIS project, and they have signaled to us that they're willing to entertain a proposal or proposals for what is called here a test bed informatics project to determine the best way to get tools that are ready to go into users' hands, like the hydraulic data access system that we've been talking about, to support the development of a hydraulic information toolkit that hopefully will have more tools in it, like the one from Utah State University that I illustrated here. These would be community-supported tools that we would provide a framework for being able to provide community access to them. And then to do further development where required, like digital watershed flux coupling, shared data models, and so on, where we still don't have things completely worked out of what we need to do, but we need to do some additional development before we go into the production side. Now, there is a funding opportunity open. The Earth Sciences Division has an instrumentation and facilities competition. This is an open competition with proposals due the 8th of February 2006. The testbed project that NSF is asking for can be up for up to 5 years, with funding of the order from $2 to $4 million. Developmental projects can also be submitted to this competition, so there doesn't need to be just one proposal. This is a completely open competition. There's not going to be any specification or pre-selection by Quasi of who the winning team is or anything like that. NSF will make all of those decisions. The role of Quasi is the prioritization of user needs, liaison with federal agencies, testing tools, community education, coordinating among different informatics projects like with SARA and NCED, the National Center for Earth Dynamics. Quasi will support any successful project in this competition that requests Quasi engagement, and by that I mean the engagement of the Quasi Program Office. There's going to be standard language available from the website, and in fact John Duncan has just posted to the Quasi website, and he's put the announcement at the bottom here. You can link to this announcement, and this shows more information about this funding opportunity. If you'd like to talk about the budgeting aspects of that, please contact Rick Hooper. And John Duncan has graciously agreed to chair a users committee that will review HIS products, including our hydraulic data access system. So with that, I'll complete my presentation, and I'm open for questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you wish to ask a question, please key star followed by 1 on your touch-tone telephone. If your question has been answered or you wish to withdraw your question, please key star followed by 2. Questions will be taken in the order received. Please key star 1 to begin.
Thanks, Nika. And I'd also like to just remind folks that they could use the chat box if they don't want to feel if they don't feel up to talking today. But David, thanks a lot for that presentation. I think it's really good to expose this to the community and get even more feedback than we've gotten to date.
And once again, to ask a question, please key star 1. At this time, I'm showing no audio questions.
Okay. Perhaps the gears are still grinding. So, David, how do you see things wrapping up? What's your biggest priority, I guess? Let me phrase it that way. What's your biggest priority between now and March of 06?
Well, we want to be able to get our hydraulic data access system in more of a production shape than it is now, get a better user interface, make it more accessible to people. Wendy Graham is asking, David, what tools can proposers to the December 1st declaration expect to exist by the end of this project? Well, we will have this data access system, Wendy. We will have the web services library, some of which is already available now for the National Water Information System. We will have a larger library of web services than we have now. We will have a better description of the data structure for the digital watershed than we have now, and I should mention that Wendy's hosting a workshop actually next week in Florida where we're going to go into that aspect of this in much more detail. Another thing that we want to focus on between now and the end of the project, which is in March, is how we're going to integrate with other efforts that the Earth Sciences Division has going, like at the SARA project in Arizona and the National Center for Earth Dynamics in Minnesota, and there's other things. There's a weathering program and some other things that we have to get connected with. We want also to add some material on groundwater, and Chun Miao Zheng is preparing a chapter for the status report on groundwater, for looking at site-scale representation of groundwater. So we want to be able to revise and improve our status report to expand the amount of tools that we have available and to be able to integrate better with other areas of the earth sciences before we finish the project.
Thanks. Questions, folks?
And once again, it's *1 to ask a question.
And let me just chime in here if you'd like more details from David on what tools and how you can use them for the December 1 declaration response. And I guess while we're waiting for other questions, David, we're still hoping to have another public forum for HIS in the beginning of '06, January, February timeframe?
Yes, that's right. So we want to be able to bring people together in San Diego and have an all-hands meeting and just go into what we're doing in much more detail then.
And we're still assuming that that's going to be open to the public, right?
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully we can resolve that and get dates. I know that's just around the corner, basically, in terms of travel schedules. Nika, any questions in the queue?
No questions at this time.
Okay. Quiet crowd today. I guess let's just give it another minute, and Wendy, again, chime in if you would like David to expand further on his response. And I guess let me just quickly say, before we get to this question from Mark Russell, in terms of this funding opportunity, CUAHSI's role and view in this is essentially one that we're going to employ a hands-off approach to this whole thing, and however NSF comes up with their winner, we will find a way to work with them. None of the details have been gotten to. That's the principle, and we're just going to have to sort this all out as we go. So just to throw that out there as well. David, do you see this question from Mark?
So Mark Russell is asking, how does it work at CUAHSI compared with that at NEON? NEON also has a cyber infrastructure development effort that's headed up by Chaitan Baru at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, who's the PI for our CUAHSI HIS there. They're about to publish a cyber infrastructure report, which we haven't yet seen because they're still delivering it to NSF. Bill Mitchell, who is involved with NEON, told me that they are incredibly supportive of what we're doing with HIS, and especially with this data access system that we're building. They think it's very valuable for NEON also. NEON is the National Ecological Observatory Network, and they have 3 science goals. The first goal is to look at the effect of the change in land use and climate on ecological systems. The second is to look at the availability of the nation's water and the impact that that has on ecological systems. And the third is to look at dispersion of disease and other things. It's more of a biological kind of a goal. But the first 2 NEON goals are very similar to what we're trying to do in CUAHSI. In fact, our science committee is talking about a theme concerned with hydrologic change. So the land use change and climate change things in NEON are very close to that. And what I want to do with our data modeling stuff in the second goal of NEON, which deals with the integration of hydrology and water availability and its impact on ecological systems, is to be able to work more closely with the NEON people to develop data representations for ecological systems, particularly aquatic ecology and fish and macroinvertebrates and so on in water bodies, and also for terrestrial ecology and landscapes and patches and things like that they worry about. So I anticipate actually a very fruitful interaction with NEON, and we've been concerned a lot with this here in Texas. We have a problem with environmental flows and specifying flows for bays and estuaries and in-stream flows and rivers that I've been much involved with. So I hope that we can work on that. Freddie Hellweger is asking from Northeastern what's happening specifically in the urban environment. Most tools I see being developed are for rural hydrology environment, hydro, especially when teaming with cleaner. The urban environment will have to become a focus. Freddie, you're absolutely right, and we're looking to cleaner to take the lead in that regard. So the natural focus for us in CUAHSI is the rural environment, and definitely the urban environment is a particular structure, and that's why we're trying to collaborate with Cleaner, and we hope that the Cleaner people can take the lead in that respect.
Let me just add one other comment, David, about how CUAHSI HIS compares to what NEON is doing. I think the same could be said for Cleaner, and that's that CUAHSI's approach to this is completely complementary at this point. We are, through your team's efforts, focusing on data acquisition, and a large emphasis, at least from what I gather from the folks heavily involved with NEON that I've been speaking with, have an emphasis on sensors and sensor networks and how to glean information and take information from that network and put it into their cyber infrastructure. And so I think there's real opportunity here for us to benefit. We're not reinventing each other's wheel, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're right about at the top of the hour. Any questions in the queue or any last questions in the chat box? I guess this is the time.
Okay, could variable soil and geologic depths be represented flexibly in 3D in your system? Is that perhaps? Yes, absolutely. We want to be very careful and methodical about vertical soil and geologic units. The GeoVolume is an arbitrarily shaped three-dimensional object that can assume any form at all. In the ArcGIS, it's a multi-page feature class. And so that lends itself to soil horizons, the representation of the three-dimensional structure of soil horizons. And we hope also to be able to represent not simply the borders of these horizons and representative properties of them, but also the spatially distributed interior of what's inside the soil units themselves, and the spatial and the heterogeneity that's in soil units and in hydrogeologic units. And I've been particularly fascinated by the work that's being done at the National Center for Earth Dynamics in a project they have there called the Jurassic Tank. That is an experimental system that builds sedimentary units in the lab that look very much like those that exist in the field. They have a component of the NCED program called subsurface architecture that's led by Chris Paola that's focused on that. So we're using the Jurassic Tank data as an example of what a subsurface completely distributed medium might look like. There's also a weathering project that's going on, and there was a conference this week in Delaware looking at the regolith and the soil weathering, and we very much want to be careful and methodical about the way that we deal with heterogeneity in the subsurface environment in soils and geologic units.
Any last questions?
So showing no questions in the queue.
Okay, well, David, thanks again for your time. I think this was really valuable, and as I said, we should definitely try and get that date set soon so we can let folks know and keep getting the word out. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your participation in today's conference. This concludes the presentation. You may now disconnect.